clap echoed down the hallway of Roosevelt High School like thunder, followed by a silence so sharp that even the usual chatter froze mid-sentence. Tyler Morrison, the star football player, had just struck Kesha Williams hard enough to turn her head. "Stay in your place," Tyler growled, his three friends laughing around him. "Nobody told you to bump into me." Kesha, 17 years old, was used to walking those halls unnoticed. A scholarship student from a poor neighborhood in Atlanta, she kept her grades high and her head down, carrying a worn backpack and wearing a uniform that had seen better days. While everyone else flaunted designer sneakers, she avoided trouble at all costs. But that day, trouble had found her. Kesha touched the red mark on her cheek, her eyes locking on Tyler's with a disturbing calm. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. Tyler smirked. "What are you going to do? Cry to the principal?" He lifted his hand again, ready to strike harder. That's when everything changed. In one fluid motion, too fast for anyone to follow, Kesha caught his wrist, spun his body around, and twisted until a sickening pop filled the air. Tyler collapsed to the floor, screaming in pain, his arm hanging at an unnatural angle. "My shoulder! She broke my shoulder," he cried, tears streaking down his face as his friends backed away, their bravado gone in an instant. The hallway was frozen. The shy girl no one ever noticed had just taken down the most feared bully in the school in less than 3 seconds, using a move that looked like something straight out of an action film. Kesha calmly adjusted her backpack and scanned the crowd of wide eyes. Her gaze stopped on Tyler's friends. "Anyone else?" she asked, her voice unsettlingly steady. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was Tyler's moaning on the cold tile floor. Kesha stepped right over him and walked toward her next class as if nothing had happened. But behind her, one question burned in every mind. Who was Kesha Williams really? Because one thing was clear. No one learns to do that by accident. The precision, the control, the icy calm, it all pointed to years of training. What no one realized was that behind her quiet facade lay a past that explained everything. If you want to know how a seemingly defenseless girl could neutralize a 220-pound player with such ease, hit subscribe now, because the truth about Kesha's past will leave you speechless. Minutes later, Principal Peterson arrived to find Tyler still on the floor surrounded by paramedics, his shoulder clearly out of place. The hallway was packed with students recording the scene on their phones. "Where's the girl who did this?" the principal demanded, scanning the crowd. But Kesha had already vanished, as if she'd never been there. Jake Morrison, Tyler's cousin and just as popular, was furious. "That girl is dangerous! She belongs behind bars!" he shouted, his words fueling even more gossip. On the school's social media, videos of the incident were already blowing up, half the comments praising Kesha as a hero who finally humbled Tyler, the other half branding her unstable. But one thing everyone agreed on: no one could explain how a 120-pound girl had just taken down a 220-pound football player like it was nothing. Meanwhile, Kesha sat quietly in the library, pretending to study math while her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. It had been 3 years since she had to use her skills like that, and the survival instinct was back, raw and unsettling. Because the truth was, Kesha Williams wasn't just a 17-year-old scholarship student, she was a survivor. At 14, she and her mother fled Detroit after her stepfather, a dangerous man with deep criminal ties, discovered her mother was secretly working with the police. They had just 20 minutes to grab what they could carry before disappearing forever. For 2 years, Kesha and her mother drifted from shelters to rundown apartments, always glancing over their shoulders, always ready to pack and run again. It was in one of those shelters that she met retired Sergeant Jennifer Cruz, an Afghanistan veteran who volunteered to teach self-defense to women in vulnerable situations. Jennifer quickly recognized something in Kesha, a fierce determination hidden beneath her shy demeanor, and took her under her wing. "Strength doesn't come from muscle," Jennifer would say during grueling training sessions. "It comes from the mind, and anyone who underestimates a quiet girl always pays the price. For 2 years, Kesha trained 5 hours a day, Krav Maga, Jiu-Jitsu, boxing, and disarming techniques. But even more valuable than the physical skills was Jennifer's guidance in reading people, spotting danger, and never revealing her hand until the exact moment it mattered. By the time Kesha and her mother finally settled in Atlanta, she had become something no one at Roosevelt High could have imagined: a human weapon disguised as a shy teenager. The scholarship to Roosevelt was supposed to be her chance at normalcy. She had promised her mother, stay quiet, stay unnoticed, just live like an ordinary student. But Tyler Morrison had already shattered that promise. At lunchtime, his cousin Jake and 2 friends, Brett and Connor, cornered Kesha near the lockers. They had been whispering all morning, planning how to teach her a lesson, convinced that 3 against 1 would be enough to put her in her place. "Hey, tough girl," Jake sneered, blocking her path. "You think you can hurt my cousin and just walk around like nothing happened?" Kesha stopped, hands loose at her sides, eyes flicking quickly across the scene. Exit left, blocked by Brett. Exit right, Connor. Behind her, lockers. Ahead, Jake trying to copy his cousin's intimidating posture. "Tyler hit me first," she replied, voice calm. "I only defended myself." "You broke his arm," Brett shouted, stepping closer. "That's not defense, that's attack." What they didn't know was that every second spent talking gave Kesha more time to evaluate their weaknesses. Jake leaned too heavily on his left side. Old knee injury, maybe. Brett's hands trembled. He didn't even want to be there. Connor was the real threat. Confident, relaxed, but his weight was poorly balanced. "You have 5 seconds to get out of my face," Kesha said. Her voice low but so firm it made Connor shift back without realizing it. Jake forced a laugh. "Or what? You're going to break our arms too. 3 against 1, kitten. You're not that tough." That's when Kesha smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not nervous either. It was cold, precise. The kind of smile that only comes from someone who has already faced far greater threats. "You're right," she said, adjusting her backpack. 3 against 1 isn't fair." Jake smirked, thinking she was surrendering. "For you," Kesha added. By now, students had started gathering. Phones came out. Everyone wanted to see if the girl who had dropped Tyler would do it again. But instead of waiting for them to attack, Kesha walked calmly up to Jake, leaned in close, and whispered something in his ear that drained every bit of color from his face. Nobody heard what she said. All they saw was Jake instantly backing away, grabbing Brett and Connor by the sleeves. "Forget it," he muttered, refusing to meet her eyes. "Not worth it." The 3 of them hurried down the hall, leaving behind a confused crowd who couldn't understand why the showdown had ended so abruptly. What Kesha had whispered were just 7 words. "I know where you live, and you don't." It wasn't true, but the way she said it made it sound like it could become true at any moment. And Jake Morrison, arrogant as he was, had enough sense to recognize a real threat when he heard one. As Kesha walked to class, she felt eyes following her, some filled with respect, others with fear, but all burning with the same question. Who was this quiet girl who had appeared only 2 years ago and was now dismantling the most notorious bullies in the school? The answer to that question was hidden in social service files, old police reports, and memories Kesha tried hard to bury. But as Jennifer Cruz had taught her, sometimes the past must be confronted if the future is to be safe, and something told Kesha. The Morrisons weren't finished yet. They had underestimated the quiet girl once, and paid the price. But arrogance has a way of blinding people. What Jake Morrison and his friends didn't realize was that every new attempt to intimidate her only strengthened Kesha's resolve. Some people can't be bent, no matter how hard you try to break them. The next morning, Kesha walked into school to find her face plastered across dozens of flyers scattered along the hallways. "Warning! Dangerous student!" the headline screamed, with a blurred photo of her walking down the corridor. Beneath it, in bold letters, Kesha Williams is a threat to our community. We demand immediate action from the administration. Jake and his crew had spent the entire night launching a smear campaign, convinced they could weaponize public opinion to force Keisha out. But they had no idea who they were really dealing with. Mrs. Rodriguez, the history teacher, noticed her walking calmly past the whispers and stares. While other students pointed and gossiped, Kesha quietly picked up one flyer, folded it, and tucked it into her backpack without a word. "Interesting psychological warfare strategy," Mrs. Rodriguez remarked when Kesha entered the classroom. "But I have the feeling you've faced worse tactics than this." It was the first time in 2 years a teacher had spoken so directly to her about the shadows she carried. Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't just a teacher. She had once been a war correspondent in Iraq, and she knew the look of someone trained to survive in hostile territory. "They're trying to isolate me," Kesha said evenly, surprising her teacher with her cold analysis. "They're creating a narrative that I'm dangerous, so they can justify what they've already done." Mrs. Rodriguez closed the classroom door and leaned forward. "You realize this isn't going to stop, don't you? Tyler Morrison's family has power. His father owns the largest dealership in town and practically bankrolls the school's sports program." Kesha's tone was calm but carried weight. "I know exactly who the Morrisons are." At lunch, Jake launched the second phase of his plan. He convinced 15 students to sign a petition demanding Kesha's expulsion, then staged dramatic videos for TikTok, standing with Brett and Connor. "This girl is unstable," he declared into the camera. "My cousin is in the hospital because of her. How many more have to get hurt before the administration finally acts?" The video spread like wildfire. Within 2 hours, it reached parents, alumni, even townspeople. Some comments demanded Kesha's removal. Others questioned why the school was letting things spiral. Jake smiled, convinced he had discovered the perfect strategy to destroy her. But while he was feeding the internet with rumors, Kesha was sitting in the library with Mrs. Rodriguez, who had brought her personal laptop. "You said you know the Morrison family," the teacher asked cautiously. "Care to explain?" Kesha hesitated, then made a choice that would flip the game completely. "Rico Martinez," she said slowly. "My ex-stepfather. He supplied high-end clients. Tyler Morrison Sr. was one of his favorites." Mrs. Rodriguez froze, processing her words. "Do you have proof?" Kesha pulled a small flash drive from her backpack. "Rico recorded everything. Names, dates, transactions, even photos. My mom copied the files before we disappeared. 3 years of evidence." The teacher stared at the flash drive as if it were a live explosive. "Kesha, do you understand what this means?" "It means," Kesha replied steadily, "that while Jake is playing games in the hallways, I have ammunition for a war he doesn't even know exists." That same afternoon, Tyler Morrison Sr. stormed into the school for an emergency meeting with Principal Peterson. His son had spent the morning in tears, not just from pain, but from humiliation. The story was spreading online, and Tyler Sr. would not let his family's reputation be dragged through the mud. "I want this girl expelled immediately," he demanded, slamming his fist on the principal's desk. "My lawyer is already preparing charges. If you don't take action, we'll sue the school as well." Principal Peterson, a man who had spent 30 years keeping powerful families happy, nodded nervously. "Let's schedule a disciplinary hearing for tomorrow, given the seriousness of the situation." "There is no seriousness," a firm voice cut in. Mrs. Rodriguez had entered the office uninvited. "There is only a bully who finally met someone who refused to be his victim." Tyler Morrison Sr.'s face flushed with anger. "And who exactly are you?" he barked. "I'm the teacher who witnessed Tyler assault Keisha Williams without provocation," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, her voice calm but cutting. "And I'm also someone with a very personal interest in understanding your family better, Mr. Morrison." Something in her tone made him falter. He couldn't explain why, but the way she looked at him was unsettling, like someone who knew far more than she should. That night, while Jake Morrison celebrated what he thought was his family's inevitable victory, sneaking champagne from the cellar and posting stories about justice finally being served. Kesha sat at home with her mother. She told her everything. "Kesha," her mother said softly, gripping her hands, "you know using that information about Rico could put us in danger again." "I know, Mom," Kesha answered. Her eyes were steady. "But some battles can't be avoided. They made me their enemy. Now they'll find out what kind of enemy I can be." Across town, Mrs. Rodriguez spent the evening digging into the Morrison family's background. The pieces began to align. Tyler Sr.'s extravagant lifestyle didn't match the profits of a car dealership. Old rumors about shady investments resurfaced. She didn't need much more to confirm her suspicion. The Morrisons weren't just privileged, they were compromised. Meanwhile, Jake released another video, declaring victory before the hearing had even begun. "Tomorrow, justice will be served," he boasted into the camera, calling Kesha dangerous and unfit for the school. Thousands of people watched, shaking their heads at what seemed like another case of the system protecting the powerful. But true strength grows in silence. Sometimes, apparent defeat is just the perfect setup for a devastating counterattack. The next morning, Roosevelt High's auditorium was overflowing. Tyler Sr. had invited local media, turning what should have been a closed school meeting into a public spectacle. Reporters filled the aisles. Jake was live streaming to his followers, grinning like he'd already won. "Today you're going to see justice," Jake declared into his phone. "This violent girl is finally going to pay." Then Kesha walked in quietly from the back, her mother on one side, Mrs. Rodriguez on the other. She ignored Jake's taunts, sat in the front row, and rested her hands calmly in her lap. In her palm, concealed from the cameras, was a small flash drive. Principal Peterson adjusted his glasses nervously. "We are here to evaluate the incident involving Kesha Williams and Tyler Morrison, which resulted in serious injury is an understatement," Tyler Sr. interrupted, standing dramatically. "My son has been traumatized. That delinquent broke his shoulder without cause." The crowd, stacked with Morrison family supporters, erupted with applause and murmurs of agreement. Jake grinned, recording every second for his live stream. But then Mrs. Rodriguez rose from her seat, her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Before these accusations continue, I'd like to present evidence that may change how this case is seen." Tyler Sr. chuckled mockingly. "Evidence? Everyone here saw what happened. What more could you possibly have?" "Evidence about who truly poses a danger to this community," she replied, calmly connecting her laptop to the projector. Kesha stood, placed the flash drive into Mrs. Rodriguez's hand, and sat back down. The screen lit up. The first video clip appeared, Tyler Morrison Sr. in a dim garage, handing a thick envelope of cash to a man with tattoos. The timestamp was 3 years old. The footage was sharp, undeniable. The auditorium erupted in gasps. Parents whispered, reporters scrambled to record, students stared wide-eyed at the screen. Tyler Sr.'s face drained of color. His hands shook. This is fake," he stammered. But the confidence in his voice was gone. Mrs. Rodriguez clicked to the next file. Bank statements showing regular $200,000 transfers from Morrison Motors into offshore accounts, every transfer aligning perfectly with the recorded transactions. Jake stopped his live stream mid-broadcast, his smirk collapsing into shock. The next slide, screenshots of messages between Tyler Sr. and Rico Martinez. Dates, amounts, meeting places, over 15 months of records. By now, the auditorium was chaos. Parents shouting, reporters firing questions, Principal Peterson fumbling desperately to restore order. And Kesha sat quietly in the front row, watching the once untouchable Morrison empire unravel, piece by piece. One by one, the messages appeared on the projector. "I need the merchandise for Saturday's party. My friends are asking if you have anything stronger. Rico, I can't be seen talking to you in public. Just use the normal deliveries." Gasps echoed across the auditorium. Tyler Morrison Sr. tried to rise from his chair, but his knees buckled beneath him. I never... This is a setup, he stammered, sweat shining on his forehead. Then, for the first time that morning, Kesha spoke. Her voice sliced through the chaos like a blade. Mr. Morrison, do you remember March 15th, 2022, the night you were so wasted you fell down your own garage stairs? The silence was suffocating. Tyler Sr. remembered that night all too well, one of the worst mornings after of his life. Mrs. Rodriguez clicked to the final file. The screen flickered to life with a cell phone recording, Tyler Sr. swaying, barely able to stand, while Rico counted thick stacks of cash. This, Kesha explained calmly, was recorded by Rico himself. He filmed his best clients as life insurance, every single one. The auditorium exploded in noise, students whispering, parents covering their faces, reporters shouting into cameras. Jake Morrison's live stream cut off abruptly. His face had gone pale, every ounce of bravado gone. The parents who had filled the front rows in support of the Morrisons began standing quietly, slipping toward the exits. None of them wanted their names tied to this scandal. Kesha rose to her feet, her gaze locking onto Tyler Sr. Now, she said evenly, let's talk about domestic violence, and where Tyler Jr. really learned it was acceptable to hurt people weaker than himself. Mrs. Rodriguez presented the last file, medical reports, records of accidents suffered by Tyler Jr., his mother, and even employees of Morrison Motors, injuries that painted a very different story once viewed together. Principal Peterson's face went ashen. His voice trembled. Mr. Morrison, I think we'll need to adjourn this hearing immediately and contact the authorities. How? Tyler Sr. whispered hoarsely. How did you get all this? Kesha's dark eyes met his, calm and unshaken. You forgot one thing. People like me survive by gathering information. Rico kept these recordings for years. When my mother helped the police, she made copies. For protection, Tyler Sr. tried one final threat. You have no idea who you're messing with. Actually, Mrs. Rodriguez cut in coldly, we know exactly who you are. A failed criminal who used dirty money to live a life your dealership could never afford. 20 minutes later, police entered the auditorium. The crowd parted as they cuffed Tyler Morrison Sr. and led him outside in full view of television cameras. Every second of his humiliating walk to the patrol car was broadcast live across town. Jake stood frozen, his phone forgotten in his hand. For days he had posted videos promising justice. Now he was watching his own family's destruction unfold in real time. His followers flooding the comments with mockery. Kesha remained seated in the front row, her expression composed. There was no gloating, no smile, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who had carried heavy secrets for too long and had finally laid them down. Mrs. Rodriguez sat beside her. How do you feel? Kesha exhaled slowly. Relieved. Not because I won, but because I don't have to keep hiding anymore. Around them, the students who had once whispered and avoided her now looked with something different in their eyes. Respect, admiration. Because Kesha Williams hadn't just defended herself against a bully. She had exposed an empire of corruption, lies, and violence that had poisoned her entire community. What no one in the auditorium could have predicted was how this dramatic revelation would ripple outward, transforming not only Kesha's life, but the entire social dynamic of Roosevelt High, and even the city of Atlanta itself. Because when the dust settled and the charges were filed, it was Kesha Williams, the quiet girl everyone had underestimated, who became the symbol of a change no one would ever forget. 6 months later, Tyler Morrison Sr. was serving an 8-year sentence for trafficking and fraud. The dealership was gone, the family mansion auctioned to pay debts, and Jake Morrison transferred to a public school across town, stripped of the privileges that once defined him. For the first time, he knew what it was like to be just another kid, no influence, no protection. Kesha, on the other hand, had become a legend at Roosevelt High, not for breaking a bully's shoulder, but for exposing an empire of corruption that no one else had dared to touch. Mrs. Rodriguez recommended her for a full scholarship to Harvard University, where Keisha planned to study forensic criminology. "You know what's ironic?" Mrs. Rodriguez said one afternoon as she helped Kesha with her college applications. "The Morrisons tried to use your humble origins as a weapon. And now, those same origins are the very thing propelling you to the highest places." The girl who once slipped invisibly through the hallways now received respectful nods and greetings from classmates and teachers. More importantly, other victims of bullying, 3 of them, had stepped forward for help, inspired by how Kesha had stood up with intelligence, not just force. On the final day of school, Jake Morrison made one last attempt to approach her. "Kesha, I wanted to apologize," he muttered, his voice low, his pride gone. "I didn't know about my uncle, about the money, the drugs." Kesha looked at him with her signature calm. "Jake, you always knew who your cousin was. The difference is, now everyone else knows too." As she walked the halls of Roosevelt High one last time, Kesha reflected on how a single slap had changed her entire life. Tyler Morrison had tried to humiliate her. Instead, he had given her the chance to prove that some people cannot be broken. She realized then that the best revenge wasn't snapping the shoulder of someone who struck you. The best revenge was building a life so extraordinary that your enemies spent the rest of their days wondering how they had ever underestimated you. Tyler Jr. was still in physical therapy. Jake was flipping burgers at a fast food chain. And Keisha Williams? She was on her way to Harvard, carrying with her the proof that true strength doesn't come from where you're born, but from how you rise when others try to bring you down. If Keisha's story of courage and determination inspired you, hit that subscribe button and join us for more powerful stories that prove justice sometimes just needs a little help from people like us.